Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Entertainment Annotated here from Entertainment Media. I'm joined today by Jackson from Full Circle. I'll let Jackson say a few things about himself.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Josh. I'm very excited to be here and talk some superhero movies and some other good news today.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the Super Bowl happened this past weekend as of when we're recording, and man, what a great weekend for the film and TV industry, honestly, from a consumer standpoint, with all the trailers and the I guess, reveals in terms of little hints here and there about what's upcoming if you're like, a Warner Brothers fan of the DC stuff, or the trailers that came out for properties like Doctor Strange and Moon Knight, or if just in general you're a fan of the business side of things, because I believe Paramount, just they are rebranding and all that. I mean, it's kind of a crazy weekend. But I guess before we get into all of that, Jackson, how was your Super Bowl weekend? I mean,
it's always a little bittersweet when the now Commanders are not, playing every year, and I have to deal with that fact. But working in this space and in the entertainment media space, I mean, this is as much your Super Bowl in terms of football as it is for entertainment, right? I mean, these trailers, these
Very
movies,
true.
It's twofold, really. The commercials, it's the whole experience. So, I mean, I'm always down for football. I'm a massive fan of football. I was very excited, great game. But you can't help when all these trailers are going on and these massive implications of Marvel movies and Star Wars and whatever it may be. Although we didn't get an Obi-Wan trailer, unfortunately, but it's a monumental event, and I look forward to it every year.
Yeah, I'll never forget one Super Bowl. I think it was the one where it was like, was it Maroon 5 or something? Anyways, Travis Scott, had like the SpongeBob animation. I think it was that year, but I'll never forget it because that was the year I was doing a bunch of breakdowns on all the trailers. And we already kind of had an idea, of like what trailers would be at the Super Bowl. But I basically, like, the entire halftime show and some of the third quarter even, I was like still making like the quickest trailer breakdowns I possibly could, which in hindsight, I don't know how I did that. I guess I was just in such a flow that I was able to just, crank these things out. But, I mean, it's crazy. But I guess, besides Super Bowl, since this isn't a sports podcast, even though, don't tempt me.
Same here.
Yeah. Have you watched any movies lately? Any new TV shows or current TV shows you're wrapping up?
I checked out, two things. I checked out The Fallout on HBO Max.
Is that good?
Starring Jenny Ortega. It's actually pretty well done. In terms, the teenage life is very hard to get right on in movies and TV. It can either be too cliche or a little or over the top or like kind of toned down way. I think they hit the nail on the head with the kind of how children would deal in a situation of like a school shooting, things like that, which are very serious topics. But I think it did a very good job of trying to like humanize the people who are involved and not make them out to be these massive figureheads and like they're just kids. And I thought that was really well done. A shorter runtime, which I thought was good. It got straight to the point. It had a very heavy ending too, which I thought was powerful. And then from that, I've started Attack on Titan, which is my first anime I've ever watched.
Oh man.
Yeah, I've never really gotten into it. Kind of as a kid, I watched some Naruto and some Dragon Ball, but nothing really serious. But I've jumped into Attack on Titan. I've kind of gotten sucked up a little bit. So much so I had to go out and buy some manga because the show hasn't finished and I needed to know how it ended.
Yeah, I mean, so I got into Attack on Titan also, like a while back because I just seen people commenting about it so often. And it was one of those things where, I used to read the manga for like Dragon Ball and Naruto and, I was a casual, like by a lot of means in terms of like, it was pretty much just those two. Like I followed them from beginning to end though. So it wasn't like I was, and I watched the animes, which, in the case of Naruto, felt like forever. The anime was so long, so much filler, especially with Dragon Ball. But I really didn't get into anything after that. I tried One Piece, it just never grabbed me. And there was like, I know tons of other ones, whether it was on Netflix or just other streamers one time or another. And I never really got into it like that. I had an old roommate who was really into it, but it never rubbed off on me. But one day, I'd seen the Attack on Titan, like a fan made live action trailer, I think years ago. And it was kind of cool. And it was always in the back of my mind, like, man, this stuff is like that's an interesting premise. Like, I want to know more. Like, what are these Titans? And because I think there was a theory that Hollywood was trying to make, or not a theory, but a report that Hollywood was trying to develop something.
Well, Andy Muschietti had signed on from the It franchise. Had signed on for a live action adaptation that's kind of gone nowhere.
Yeah, so I think that probably was the report, and it finally made me go, let me check this out, right? And I read some of the manga, and I caught up on where the anime was, and I actually really dig it because not hilariously, but I was taking a Norse mythology class like back in college, and for a semester, like Norse mythology culture and mythology and all that stuff. And there's so much of that in Attack on Titan, like with Ymir and all that stuff. I wasn't expecting that. And it was like the coolest thing to me how they kind of have like a pseudo, world tree thing going on. I mean, I don't want to, say spoilers, so I'm not going to say anymore. But all that to say, I think it's actually a really cool premise and a really cool, just in general, like concept. Like, I would love to see an adaptation of it because I think it's one of those things where it's just kind of cool. And I love the story of the protagonist because of the arc he has from, like, again, I can't really say too much in detail without spoiling it, but it's a very unique character arc that I feel is one of the few in like anime and manga that actually goes from beginning to end. Everything else just kind of feels like it's stagnant. Like Goku's really stagnant. Vegeta's pretty stagnant. Naruto even is pretty stagnant. It's just like power scaling. That's all they do now. But I felt like Attack on Titan actually had a really interesting narrative component to it. So yeah, I mean, that's a great one to get into, I guess. But anything besides that, I can't comment. And I want to check out that HBO. Is it a movie or a show?
It's a movie. It runs about an hour and a half. Pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, because I started this past week the marriage one. Something scenes, I think, from a marriage.
Oh, with Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain.
Yeah, I started that. I'm on episode 2. I really liked it. Just like a change of pace kind of TV show. And I also watched before the Super Bowl, just to kill time. I watched the Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt on Amazon Prime Video. I just, I never got to watching it. I started it and I didn't continue it. And I finally just rewatched it from the beginning and just went straight through. And I thought the aliens were pretty cool. I just think I told you this before. I keep between this movie and A Quiet Place, like the aliens that they're now like doing in a lot of these movies like this, I can't help but feel like they're basically like the directors, the writers ask themselves, man, if I could do a xenomorph without doing a xenomorph, what would I do? Because the whole like alien ship thing, when they got to that, and it gave me very Prometheus kind of vibes, I would say. Actually, straight up, I thought they stole that from Prometheus. And then even with like A Quiet Place 2, like when they kind of, or not A Quiet Place 2, but I think one of the writers for A Quiet Place at one point threw around the idea that potentially they were, created basically as a bioweapon to, clear out planets. And I was like, well, that's kind of like xenomorphy, the way they kind of like presented it, even though obviously that's not a totally original concept, clearing out within, one alien race, whatever. But yeah, that's what I was kind of been watching. And I guess it kind of leads into our first topic, right? So the Book of Boba Fett ended and we had both watched that and talked about that before, both on this podcast. And it's funny, the first time we did a podcast talking about the Book of Boba Fett, it was in a very positive light.
It was,
We
wasn't
talked
it?
about it was after episode 2, I think, which was a great character driven episode. And we were talking about how much, this is exactly, the kind of content Lucasfilm should be making when they're mining the Star Wars IP, and like, what a great deconstruction. I don't know if we use that word, but it feels like a word that might have been thrown around. But, deconstruction of Boba Fett's character, and, this is what they should have, taken a lesson from when they developed the movies and all that stuff. Like, we really kind of counted our chickens before they hatched in some regards, if that's not too harsh. But what did you think now that, the dust has settled, the book has ended? What did you think?
So I know we discussed, we talked after the initial... We talked both after the initial Mando episode and the second. I know we recorded after the second Mando focused episode had come out. And we were both a little thrown out of sorts, right? A little taken aback about what we were dealing with, and how the tone of the show had shifted drastically to this whole other story. And I mean, I went into the finale like completely apprehensive. I was like on edge. Like, I don't know what we're going to do here. I don't know what's going to happen. And I mean, did the finale like satisfy me in terms of the Boba Fett story completely? No, not really. Was it rushed? Absolutely, it was rushed. I think my biggest gripe though is the fact that there was a lot of good stuff in the finale that could have been expanded on and could have been touched on in earlier episodes that were, put on to focus on Mando. That wasn't. And it kind of just came to a screeching halt. And I know one of the points that you brought to me, and I mean we talked about this before, was the mindset that Lucasfilm goes into these things, where rather than touching on things that people may not be familiar with, is assuming people know things. And I'm talking specifically about the relationship between Boba Fett and Cad Bane, which is something that dates back to the Clone Wars. It dates back, even it's touched on with Finnick briefly, in Bad Batch, where we see Cad Bane in the comics, significantly. That the threat of Cad Bane in general, and the way that he rivals Boba and is even superior to Boba in many ways, having been the number one bounty hunter in the galaxy after Jango's death and before Boba's ascension. They were showing. They were not telling in any way, shape, or form. And I think that given that was the climax of the finale, was his fight with him, it feels lackluster. It felt like a lot was left on the table. And again, like, I don't need them to retread every single, you remember that time that we fought XYZ and blah, blah, this, that, and the other, and I put that dent in your helmet. I don't need every little thing referenced, but I needed more out of the finale in terms of its big climactic moment than what we got.
Yeah, I think a good analogy to describe the use of Cad Bane, right, is, let's say, Spider-Man No Way Home, right? Just because it's a really, I feel like almost everyone has seen that movie, so it's good for the use of an example. Let's say you took Green Goblin and you took away the casual fans' knowledge of Green Goblin, right? So let's say the Raimi films never existed and you're watching No Way Home. Or let's say they existed, right? But you just have never seen them, which is probably a better way to go about this example. So the Raimi films exist. The Mark Webb duology exists. You've never seen them. You've only seen the Tom Holland films, right? And you go into No Way Home and you see Green Goblin, and your friend next to you says, hey, like, that's like a big character for Spider-Man, right? Like a big villain, whatever. Let's say you take out every scene with Green Goblin besides the scene where they have the fight in the apartment building. So you take out the Aunt May scene, you take out all that. So all you have is, he's a formidable foe to Spider-Man, to your protagonist. The same way with Cad Bane, they had that scene where it was him versus Cobb Vanth. Then let's say the next scene between him, Green Goblin, and Spider-Man is the very, very end where they're battling at the Statue of Liberty, that one-on-one. Let's say those are the only two scenes you have, right? So you take out all the other scenes that Green Goblin had, the stuff with Aunt May, you take out the fact that, he came from the Raimi film, so you take away that context and that history, and you're just a very casual fan. So in general, you don't understand the iconic rivalry that is Spider-Man and Green Goblin. That's how a lot of fans, I felt, it came across with Cad Bane. Because, like you said, that's supposed to be a major character for Fett. That's supposed to be like that moment where he finally defeats Cad Bane, the guy that put a dent in his helmet. That's supposed to be like a major moment. And it felt hard to really appreciate it because they didn't really build up to it. I mean, does that example make sense? Like the Spider-Man one? Because that's how like when I thought about it, I felt about it.
Right, you're betting on people knowing things from other material, right? And when you're talking about the Tobey Maguire films, it's a different scenario when Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield come back, right? It's a different playground you're playing in. It's theatrical, it's massive. It's not a cartoon that aired on Cartoon Network, you know what I mean? Or comic books you had to pick up at your local comic shop, right? It's not as niche as that sort of thing. So when you're talking on a broad scale like Spider-Man, like yes, you're referring to that, but they went the right route. They put enough effort into making it out. Those scenes in the underground of the Sanctum between Doc Ock and Norman and between the other characters, all kind of figuring out what had happened to them, right? And they're explaining their circumstances. That calls back to what happened, right? We don't even get any of that until Boba like barely references the fact that he's no longer a child when he's talking to Cad Bane, right? Like it's very brief, and then
yeah, which is funny in itself because he's like what, almost 50,
right later so. And I mean, and then later when Cad Bane is talking to Boba about his father, right, about him being a killer and his father's blood in him, like there's touches of it, little touches, right? We didn't get enough of it. We didn't get even some exposition from Finnick, who off from the side, maybe when talking to Din Djarin, could have said, "Oh, it's Cad Bane. They have a long history." Anything like that. You know what I mean? Just to I know that, and I'm not trying to be we need to protect the fans who don't know. It's like, well, no, we just need to tell the story in a way that makes it worthwhile to have that climax. He kind of just shows up.
It needs to be accessible.
Right. I mean, it does need to be accessible. It does need to be accessible. But in that same regard, I think they even the story they did tell, it could have benefited from that rivalry being explored more. Right. It wasn't, and so people who did feel the weight didn't feel it nearly as much as they could have. Right. Those moments between the two of them talking about their past, or somebody mentioning the past, because it's there. And it's the same thing with, they brought Chrysanthemum in. Him and Boba have a past in the comics that they never touched on either. And people were like, well, that's kind of strange. And obviously I didn't read those specific comic books, but people know about it. And it's a Star Wars. The lore is so deep. Like, why are we choosing to ignore things like they're like the comics are dirty laundry you want to throw under the bed? You know what I mean? Like it's the universe. This is what we signed up for.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think, you talk about weight. And one of the things I think about is, one of the things, we talked about this before, and this was before the finale, aired. So we had talked about things that we hope don't happen in the finale, or just in general, they don't do, because you're almost undercutting other shows like The Mandalorian specifically. And, I thought the episode, the first one, I believe directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, that, showed us what Mando had kind of been up to a little bit, and, brought him into the fold, and it ended with, Finnick basically meeting with Mando and talking to him about Boba needing his help. That I thought was a good episode, and I thought it was a good change of pace episode before you get to that final
completely
act,
agree,
so to speak. But the second episode, where we got Grogu and Luke and Ahsoka, that felt so out of place. That felt like it should have been an episode, maybe episode 2 potentially, of The Mandalorian season 3. And the only reason I say that is because the weight of Grogu being separated from Mando was kind of taken away. You know, like I almost felt it was smart having Mando in the Book of Boba Fett as a part of it, but not the Grogu stuff. Just like that one first episode he's in, and then he's like, you know, a part of the story as a assisting character, supporting character. I thought that was smart almost on Lucasfilm's behalf, because then when we have the gap between the ending of the Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian season 3, it makes it feel like more time has passed and that Mando has been doing things in between when we last saw him giving Grogu to Luke and when inevitably he would have, you know, obviously had the reunion with Grogu in Mando season 3. But I just felt like it was so weird, such a weird creative choice to have Grogu leave Luke and reunite with Mando in a spin-off series when that's such a massive development as a part of the story of The Mandalorian. Like, that to me just felt weird because they basically established like 3 different plot lines for Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett that should have been saved for Mando season 3. The first plot line being the whole thing where Mando has to go, if he's, you know, obviously a deep zealot in the cult that he was raised in, he needs to go to Mandalore and bathe in like those waters, right? In those caves or whatever. Obviously it's the Darksaber, so that's a component of it too. So I'm sure once he goes to goes to the planet and people see him with the Darksaber, that might cause a ruckus, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that was established in the Book of Boba Fett when the armorer asked him, like, have you taken off your helmet, and what he needs to do to basically redeem himself, which I don't know how they're going to prove that if he even did it, but whatever, I guess honor system. That's one. Number 2, the Grogu reunion. That whole thing with Luke training him and, you know, everything that came with it. And then 3, I feel like just in general, him, like, I guess I would say him learning more about the Darksaber in terms of using it and all of that. I feel like that's almost its own plot line, like subplot in a way, because we obviously know that that's going to have a payoff later, probably when he fights the villain at the end of Mando season 3, whoever it is, whether it's, you know, Moff Gideon or whoever, and he basically perfectly wields the Darksaber instead of fighting against it, as Armorer said. And I'm sure they're going to tie that to some sort of, you know, pathos in the character arc of Mando to make it really a kind of conquering this, you know, block kind of moment. I feel like they took all those things and they made it something introduced in a spin-off, which just feels it just feels weird, you know? Like, it's like you have Iron Man and you have Avengers, and it's like you introduced I don't know, like, you introduced the whole thing
you left
where
a cliffhanger from Iron Man 3.
Well, it's like you introduced that he had the poisoning, right? Like he was getting poisoned by the old materials that he was using for the arc reactor in his chest. Like, you introduce that in Iron Man 2. It's like they don't solve that, and they solve it instead in the Avengers.
Well, but even a little, you know, to even push back on that point a little bit, at least they would have marketed Avengers continuing Tony Stark's story in some way. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Whereas it would have been like he solves it in Captain America 3 or Captain America 2 instead of Civil War, right? So like something he was not supposed to appear in, but it's a major payoff for his character. And what I'll push back on even more, not to your point, but in the bigger scheme of people who have decided that because the powers that be at Lucasfilm have decided that, this interconnected story is all one big tapestry. Okay, sure. But I doubt, and one of my biggest gripes with the whole thing is that I think Tamora Morrison and Boba Fett as a character got kind of gypped out of more development in their story and bigger things and more exploration. Is that I don't think Boba Fett's going to turn around and come back in Ahsoka season 1 and get more character growth. So essentially what Lucasfilm has done has deemed Mando the most interesting character and his story the most interesting character possible in this entire thing, and that every show has to revolve around his world and what he's doing, which how do we expect to grow if we just stick in this, for like plant our flag and say this is the flagship, nothing will ever get bigger than this? It's like, well, that's not a great mentality to have, now is it?
Yeah, this is, you might find this interesting. So if you look up the I guess percentage of reviews that are positive, right? Per Rotten Tomatoes for the Book of Boba Fett, episode 1 is like between 80-85%. Episode 2, the one that we really liked, 90%. Episode 3, the cyborg biker gang one, 60%. So a steep decline from 90. Episode 4, like 85-86%. Episode 5, which I believe was the Mando, the first episode. One, all the way up to 100. I mean, it was a
good episode. I'll give it credit for that.
Episode 6 went down to 90, so on par with episode 2. And then episode 7, the finale, was like 54%.
Wow. I was not aware of that. Wow.
Yeah, and
worse than episode 3. Wow.
So like the way I kind of view it is, like, here are the things you could have easily done. Cut out episode 3. I mean, there was really no payoff, honestly. Like, none of the cyborg biker gang people really did anything at the end that really had like a major involvement. Like, you could have taken them out of the story basically, and probably nothing would have changed. So I would take them out, like take episode 3 out. Then you have 1, you have 2. 1 was, whatever, but 2 is a pretty great episode, and I think step forward for the character. You leave in episode 4. Obviously, you have 5 and you have 6. I would say, if you really want to, keep episode 5, and then you had the finale. But my point being with saying that is what they probably should have just done, especially if this doesn't get a season 2, is you probably should have just made a standalone Boba Fett movie and done that instead of having an entire series that you weren't even going to fully commit to Boba anyways. You might as well just have made a Boba Fett movie, and then, if you want, you could have the character appear here and there in the Mandalorian show, in, whatever other show on Disney Plus they might want to do within the Star Wars universe. But I feel, to what you were saying, Jackson, at least give us, the commitment that you gave before, where you announced this show as not Mandalorian 2.5, as it was jokingly called from the get-go, but as Jon Favreau said pretty defiantly, like, no, this is Boba Fett's show. This is not Mandalorian 2.5. And, like, Jon Favreau, showrunner of the show, clarified that the Book of Boba Fett was its own series separate from the 3rd season of The Mandalorian. And it just feels like you say that, but that's not what we got.
That's not what happened. It's not even happened.
Which is a shame, because we got so many good things, I mean, like, we got Cobb Vanth again. We got Ahsoka. We got Cad Bane in live action. We got Luke, who looked a hell of a lot better, which I believe was probably because they recruited that YouTuber, deep fake expert guy. Yeah,
very good at his job. Absolutely looked fantastic.
Exactly. And we got, obviously, Mando. We got Boba. We got so many things in this show that Star Wars fans 10 years ago, 100%, 20 years ago would die to see in, like, whether it's a TV show or whatever. So obviously, overall, it's a gift. And, as Star Wars fans, are kind of being spoiled a little bit. But I just do think that Lucasfilm needs to just be honest, like, look, if this is going to be Mando 2.5 in reality, just call it that, like, obviously you hold the Mandalorian in higher regard than Boba Fett. But what I do think they should have done with Boba Fett as a series, and you can let me know your thoughts afterwards, Jackson, but part of me just thinks, look, roll with the flashback vibe. You have Boba in the Bank of Tank for like the first 2 or 3 episodes anyways. Instead of just having the flashbacks to the Tuskens, which was actually fine, maybe have the flashbacks also go to Boba in his prime. You know, like obviously you'd have different actors portraying him, but that doesn't really matter because presumably you would never take off his helmet. So you would just have a more fit actor, probably a stunt actor, doing the role. And, you know, you could see Boba in his prime, and then because it'd be a greater flashback to just him, you know, recovering with the Tuskens and becoming a part of their tribe, so to speak, you could also then lay the groundwork and show us Cad Bane and the mentorship between Cad Bane and Boba. And through that, then we would have some actual payoff at the end when it's Boba versus Cad Bane in the present. But I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of what I wish I had seen in hindsight now, knowing what we ended up going towards. But I don't know. What do you think, Jackson?
I would have
final thoughts and all of that.
Yeah, I would have leaned much heavier into the Cad Bane stuff. I think that was where, obviously the Tuskens and that stuff was very well done in the flashbacks and learning why Boba has become this more peaceful person, not focused so much on fighting, but kind of have him being, you know, kind of attempted to be like roped into this, like right all that stuff about Cad Bane pulling him, like, you know, you're a killer, you don't get to leave this life. That was such good material that could have been drilled in, that was not, you know, it was barely touched on, and you know, just kind of thrown in for a last episode, just here you go, here's Cad Bane, and which is, it's such a rich history, and like all these bounty hunters, it's such an interesting thing. And, you know, we could have brought in even more bounty hunters or other characters and done, you know, other things like, you know, people like getting Bosk back. You know, he might have died on the sail barge, but, you know, no, everyone else seems to have survived. Or one of the IGs or Durg, people wanted them to bring in from the Clone Wars show. Just, you know, and they had Chrysanthemum in there, just like using these bounty hunters as a way to drive this Godfather-like story about a man attempting to do right by this place that he found as a kind of a found home after the Tusken Raiders took him in, is so interesting. And maybe it didn't need to be 7 episodes. Although, you know, the first Mando episode, again, I'll give them credit for, was a nice change of pace for one episode, and then they kind of faltered there the second time around. I just wish it was handled with more care and that Boba was given more to do, because, I mean, the stuff that we got, there was good stuff in there. That, you know, even if you didn't like the Robo, you know, the Alita Battle Angel looking Power Ranger people, you know, that wasn't Boba's fault. Like, that wasn't the story of Boba, you know? They just happened to be characters around the area, right? That wasn't anything he was doing. Yeah. So give him more to do. Have him do something. I just afford him the same credit Mandalorian gets, and that all the, you know, the Skywalkers and all those characters get, and maybe would have had something far more interesting.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this several times now, but I just think overall, you know, I'm still looking forward to Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, naturally.
Obi-Wan, absolutely. Been waiting for that show for, I feel like 15, 20, you know, as soon as Revenge of the Sith came out.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's worked out, actually, I think, that they've taken so long to develop it. Mm-hmm. From like a special effects standpoint, of course, but also just like the characters' ages
for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just think, you know, we're happy. I mean, everyone's happy. Every fan's happy they got the show. But I guess we just kind of wish they were more honest with what they were actually doing with it, and they weren't trying to make us think this was going to be the Boba Fett movie or Boba Fett TV show that we had been waiting for this entire time. Mm-hmm. Ironically enough, which eventually then became adapted as The Mandalorian. So, you know, kind of funny how the wheel goes around, I guess. But, you know, for our second topic here, I don't have a good segue, so I'm not going to apologize for that.
It's hard. It's very hard after that.
Yeah, so, I mean, because originally, right, our first segment was going to be talking about the trailers, you know, like the Moon Knight trailer and the Doctor Strange trailer from the Super Bowl, which is why we talked about the Super Bowl. But then just felt, after talking about what we've watched recently, Boba Fett was the more natural, you know, first topic. But yeah, it kind of messed up all my segues. But anyways, that's it for this episode. Thanks for checking it out, everyone. You know, give us a like, a subscribe. If you're listening to this on, it will be on Spotify and it'll be on YouTube, the clips. So if you're listening to it on Spotify, you know, give us a 5-star rating. Share it, like it. And we have a newsletter also. So definitely check out the newsletter. It's a curated newsletter. So basically, for all the news we talked about or other news in film and TV entertainment, we cover all of that in the newsletter. So instead of you having to go to, let's say, 10 different websites to read one article of interest each, you just go to our newsletter and we'll give you all of that in that singular newsletter. So kind of think of it as, instead of buying 10 albums to listen to one song each that you really like from each one of those albums, we're kind of like your playlist you go to that already has all the songs there that you like. So, we don't have any fluff. We don't have any clickbait. We're just giving you guys the news that's important. So go check that out. If you're interested, go subscribe to the newsletter. It's free. But with all that said and done, thanks for listening. Jackson, I'll let you tell people where they could find you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. You can follow me on Twitter at JacksonHayes67.
Sweet. So, Jackson, thanks again for being on. And
Absolutely.
with all that said and done, have a good day, everybody, and we'll see you later.